नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवतसेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी हरे कृष्ण. You continuing to read from the seventh canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the seventh chapter entitled What Srila Prahlad Maharaj Learned in the Womb. And we're reading text 40 today, 40. I'll read the verse a few times and then devotees can chant. Evam hi lokaha krutubhi kruta ami shaishnava satishayana nirmalaha तस्माददृष्टा श्रुतदूषणं परं भक्तोक्तयेशं भजतात्मलब्धये एवं हि लोकाः कृतुभिः कृता अमी क्षयिष्णव सातिशया न निर्मलाः तस्माददृष्टा श्रुतदूषणं परं भक्तो तयेशं भजतात्मलब्धये एवं हि लोकाः कृतुभिः कृता अमी शैष्णव सातिशयान निर्मलाः तस्माददृष्टा श्रुतदूषणं परं भक्त्योक्तयेशं भजतात्मलब्धये. The devotees can chant.
Evam hi loka kratubi krita ami Shaishnavas Shati Shayana Nirmalah Tasmadadrishta Shrutadushanam Param Bhaktyoktaesham Bhajatatmalabdhaye.
Evam hiloka kratubi krita ami ksayishnava satishaya nanirmalaha tasmad adrishta shrutadushanam param bhaktyot bhajatat malabdhaye.
Evam hi loka kratubi krita ami shaishnava shatishaya nanir malaha tasmad adrishta shrutatu sharam param bhakt yoktayesham bhakta bhajatatma labhaye.
Anyone else who'd like to chant? I'll read the synonyms. Evam, similarly, as earthly wealth and possessions are impermanent. He, indeed, Lokaha, higher planetary systems like heaven, the moon, the sun, and Brahmaloka. Kratubihi, by performing great sacrifices. Kritaha, achieved. Ami, all those. Kshaishnava, perishable, impermanent. Satishaya, although more comfortable and pleasing. Na, not. Nirmalaha, pure, free from disturbance. Tasmat, therefore. Adrishta Shruta, never seen or heard. Dushanam, whose fault? Param, the supreme. Bhaktya, with great devotional love. Uktaya, as described in the Vedic literature, not mixed with jnana or karma. Isham, the supreme lord. Bhajata, worship. Atmalabdhaye, for self-realization. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. It is learned from Vedic literature that by performing great sacrifices, one may elevate himself to the heavenly planets. However, although the life on the heavenly planets is hundreds and thousands of times more comfortable than life on Earth, the heavenly planets are not pure, nirmalam, or free from the taint of material existence. The heavenly planets are also temporary, and therefore they are not the goal of life. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, has never been seen or heard to possess inebriety. Consequently, for your own benefit and self-realization, you must worship the Lord with great devotion as described in the revealed scriptures. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Kshine Punye Martya Lokam Vishanti. Even if one is promoted to the higher planetary systems by performing great sacrifices, which are accomplished by the sinful act of sacrificing animals, the standard is happiness in Swargaloka is also not free of disturbances. There is a similar struggle for existence even for the king of heaven, Indra. Thus, there is no practical benefit in promoting oneself to the heavenly planets. Indeed, from the heavenly planets, one must return to this earth after one has exhausted the results of his pious activities. In the Vedas, it is said, Tat yathena karmajito loka kshiyante evam evamrita punyajito loka kshiyata. As the material positions we acquire here by hard work are vanquished, in due course of time, one's residence in the heavenly planets are also vanquished. According to one's activity of piety in different degrees, one obtains different standard of life, but none of them are permanent. Therefore, they are all impure. Consequently, one should not endeavor to be promoted to the higher planetary systems, only to return to this earth or descend still lower to the hellish planets. To stop the cycle of going up and down and coming down, one must take to Krishna consciousness. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore said, Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Bij. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 19:151. The living entity is rotating in the cycle of birth and death, going sometimes to the higher planets and sometimes to the lower planets. But that is not the solution to the problems of life. If by the grace of Krishna, one is fortunate enough to be the guru, a representative of Krishna, one gets the clue of returning home back to Godhead, having achieved self-realization. This is what is actually desirable. Bhajatatma labdhaye, one must take to Krishna consciousness for self-realization. I'll read the purport, the translation again for context. It is learned from the Vedic literature that by performing great sacrifices, one may elevate himself to the heavenly planets. However, although life on the heavenly planets is hundreds and thousands of times more comfortable than life on Earth, the heavenly planets are not pure, nirmalam, or free from the taint of material existence. The heavenly planets are also temporary, and therefore they are not the goal of life. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, has never been seen or heard to possess inebriety. Consequently, for your own benefit and self-realization, you must worship the Lord with great devotion as described in the revealed scriptures. So, in the context of this verse and the prior verse which was read yesterday, and this verse, essentially taken together, provide a clue of what Srila Prahlad Maharaj is speaking about. So in the prior verse, Prahlad Maharaj spoke about material benefits that are purely available only in this planetary system, in this lifetime, actually, not just planetary system, but this lifetime. So in the previous verses, he speaks about family, friends, uh, domestic animals like cows, elephants, horses. And that, of course, in the context of today, has been replaced by cars and so on, right? So nobody rides horses, at least um, the Amish do, but generally people have other modes of transportation. So you can replace domestic animals with cars and other things, economic development, sense gratification, and all the things we can enjoy in this lifetime are certainly temporary and flickering. And so in the prior verse, Prahlad Maharaj says, since the opportunity of human life is temporary, what benefit can these material opulences give to a sensible man who has understood himself to be eternal? So in this verse, he speaks about things that are beyond material. So things that are material, a person who is maybe not Krishna conscious, but also just contemplative, can imagine that things in the world are fairly flickering. They're a small child, for instance, has an inflated balloon and they're playing with the balloon. And as soon as the balloon pops, which eventually will, or deflate at some point, the child may cry. But the parent, the mother or the father of the child, they don't start crying along with the child because they have wisdom. They understand that it was only a matter of time before the balloon popped. So although a 2-year-old child may cry if their balloon pops, the parents, being much older and more experienced and wiser, know that that is how it is, and they will just placate the child or distract the child, give something else, because they fully understand that the existence of the balloon was only to give some temporary pleasure to the child and not a permanent thing. And similarly, as we get more experience, we understand other things we possess, like our body. We were, especially, people who might be very young, like in their 20s or early 30s, may not realize it, but may not experience it at least. They may theoretically hear about it, but once your body becomes older, you practically experience that things that you were able to do very easily when you were much younger become fairly difficult activities. Even um, the act of a young man might be very easily able to pick up something heavy and move it and so on. But as our body ages, it becomes a difficult task, and it becomes even sometimes life threatening, or you risk severe injury if you pick up something very heavy and you might throw off your back or something. So practically, as we get older, we realize that our body doesn't have the same vigor and strength that it had 20, 30, 40 years ago. So practically, we realize that things in the material world continue to degrade. Uh, but in this verse, what Srila Prabhupada Maharaj is speaking about is that while a person may understand that things that are completely material may go away, and even if someone possesses extreme amount of wealth or whatever else, they still, at least a contemplative man, would realize that at the time of death, it all goes away. It's even people who are not specifically Krishna conscious or devotees chanting Krishna's holy names and practicing Krishna consciousness, even they would speak about these points that, and I've heard this from fairly materialistic people as well, saying that, yeah, you come empty handed and you go back empty handed. So whether or not they practically realize this, at least theoretically, even any person who's somewhat intelligent can understand that material possessions are indeed temporary and at best last during this lifetime. At death, all these possessions are not something that you can take with you. This most famous story, uh, I don't know the historical accuracy of the story, but this is a story that I've heard multiple times. Alexander the Great, when he was about to pass away, he passed away as a young man. He was very young. He was probably in his late 20s or early 30s. So a very young person. So he was somebody who conquered large swaths of territory and collected wealth and riches from all the places he conquered. And he contracted some disease and he was about to die. So he told uh, his confidants that when you take my funeral procession, keep my hands visible and open, so that people can see that despite all the possessions that and he said, please take all my wealth and march it in a procession behind me, my body, so that people can see that despite having collected so much in terms of treasure and so on from my conquests, I'm not able to take anything with me. So as my body goes to get the final rites, it's very obvious that my hands are empty. I don't have anything with me. I don't know the historical accuracy of the story, so you can. But the point is still very clear. The point is that the person who died wasn't able to take anything that the person had during the lifetime with them. So in this verse, Prahlad Maharaj takes it one step further. It's a person may realize that whatever they possess in this body can only stay with the body till the body is alive. Once the soul leaves the body, none of the possessions that you have in this lifetime are relevant and are yours anymore. But a person may think that, oh, in that case, I should practice activities that lead me to a better situation after death. That if I perform, and what's understood from people who understand the Vedic literature, understand this is called karma kanda, or activities that are prescribed in the scriptures, in the Vedas. These are not, so again, this is very clearly described here that these are not whimsical activities. These are not things that people are doing whimsically or not following Shastra. This is really a person who follows the rules and regulations prescribed in the Shastras and the Vedas. So they're essentially Vedic instructions that a person is following to perform sacrifices or live in a certain way. But the objective of that is to get elevation to higher planets and so on, to get a higher outcome after death. So clearly that's a much higher goal than simply trying to possess material opulences in this lifetime. So if you compare and contrast a person who's simply interested in collecting material opulences in this lifetime and has no understanding of what happens after death is clearly condemned. Right? So that person is not even intelligent enough to understand that working so hard to collect possessions, thinking that they'll enjoy that permanently, but they don't understand that the sword of death is hanging over our heads, and as soon as that sword drops, that's the end of our holding on to things that we possess. So one may conclude incorrectly that, well, in that case, we should just aim for things that are going to last beyond my lifetime, things that I can enjoy beyond my lifetime, which is heavenly planets. So if you look at most of the religious traditions around the world, including what most people now currently follow in terms of being called Hindus, right? The concept of going to heaven is very prominent in their thinking. Right? The simplistic idea that live a pious life and then you can go to heaven and enjoy vast opulences. And Krishna says that in the Gita, in the 8th chapter. He says, Abrahma bhuvana loka punar avartinorjana. Mamupetita kaunteya punar janmana vidyate. So this Abrahma bhuvana loka punar avartinorjana. So the point that Krishna makes is he says that from the highest planet on this material creation, the Brahma's planet, to the lowest planet in the hellish regions, they're all places of repeated birth and death. The only difference is the standard of enjoyment is very different in the region that we are in. So even in the material world, we can understand in the world that we live, the practical world, there are nations that people who live there struggle even for basic existence. Right? There are nations that are ravaged by war, famine, pestilence, all sorts of natural disasters, and the people who live in those regions cannot even imagine running water in their house. They think that's a huge luxury. You open a faucet and we don't even think about it. In the morning, we open our faucet, water comes, when we use it for washing our face, brushing our teeth. We don't even think about it. We don't even think about working toilet. We don't even think about these things as luxuries. We think of them as necessities, that you open a faucet and water comes. And You use your bathroom and you turn your faucet one way, it's hot, running hot water, and you can take a nice shower, and all of that is available. If it gets very cold outside, yeah, we talk about the cold, but then our houses are heated. It's not like we are sitting in extreme cold inside the house. So the houses are nice and heated, and the temperature in the house is constant. It doesn't go down that dramatically because it's cold outside. And similarly, when it becomes hot, we may complain about the heat, but our homes are cooled and very comfortably situated in our home. So if you compare that with people in other parts of the world where they may have a struggle even for basic necessities, then one may conclude by looking at that oh, we're living in heavenly planets because our standard of happiness is very high. But practically, we know that it's not like we are free from any trouble. So we have so many issues that we deal with. The nature of the issues are different. They're not existential issues, but there are other issues. So it's not completely Vaikuntha. It's not free from anxiety. And so a person who understands this can similarly extrapolate what Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita as well, um, that a person who lives in a heavenly planet somehow happens to go to a heavenly planet, the standard of happiness they enjoy is vastly, as Srila Prabhupada says, hundreds of thousands of times more, because lifespans are also much more, the body doesn't get sick, the body doesn't get tired or all sorts of other problems we deal with. So all those things don't exist. The standard of happiness, the standard of uh, everything that they enjoy is many, many times greater than what we can even enjoy to the highest degree on this planet. So most people erroneously conclude that that is the goal of life. The goal of life is to live in a pious way that you can then go to heaven. But here, Prahlad Maharaj is dispelling that point. He says that the heavenly planets are also temporary. They are not pure. Although they are hundreds of thousands of times more comfortable than life on earth, the heavenly planets are not pure or free from the taint of material existence. Krishna speaks about this in the 13th chapter as well. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukha dosha anudarshanam. He speaks about the characteristics of the kshara or fallible existence. Akshara means infallible, which is the spiritual world, where material world, including the heavenly planets, are considered kshara or fallible, and they're subjected to janma, mrityu, jara, vyadi, which means that birth, death, old age, and disease. So these are the four things that are prevalent in the kshara universe, and dukkha doshana darshanam, which misery and fault is what is visible. And so Krishna says that this material world is dukhalayam ashashvatam. So dukhalayam means an abode of misery, and ashashvatam means impermanent or temporary. Shashvata means permanent. So ashashvata means impermanent or temporary. So our pursuit of permanent happiness in this material world is fraught uh, with danger because it doesn't exist. And Krishna is not false advertising, saying that you can enjoy permanent material happiness here, because he says very clearly this is permanent and impermanent and full of misery. Just like if you were to eat a candy bar, it says ingredients, sugar, this and that, and you bite into it, you expect it to be sweet. You expect it to be sweet, and that is your expectation with which you buy the candy bar. You open the wrapper, fully offered to Krishna. You open the wrapper, you bite into it, or you bite into a rasgulla that's been offered to Krishna or gulab jamun. You bite into that. Your legitimate expectation is that it's sweet, right? If you come to the temple feast and you see very nice gulab jamuns that are on the tray, you ask for two. You like gulab jamuns, and you bite into one. Your expectation is that it is soft and it is very sweet, and it fills your mouth with delight. But if someone were to make bitter melon balls, right? I'm not suggesting we do that, but let's say someone decided that for feast today our dessert would be bitter melon, Karela balls. So you grate up the Karela, the bitter melon, and then you make them into koftas and you fry them and you put them in, just leave those balls and people can bite into them. And if it's bitter and people are disappointed, then it is not the fault of the bitter melon. It is the fault of the person who expected the bitter melon balls to be sweet. So Krishna never says that this is a place of permanent happiness, this material world. He says it's dukhalayam ashashradam. So if we are expecting some sort of permanent happiness in this material world, then it is our foolishness. So Krishna is very clear. So the point that Srila Prahlad Maharaj makes in this verse is that similarly, even aspirations for spiritual, for heavenly planets is similarly fraught with false expectation. That Shine Punyo Martalokam Vishanti, that once your pious spirits are exhausted, then you have to come back again to the material world. So why aspire greatly to go to a place where you can get only temporary happiness? So the point that Srila Prabhupada makes in the purport, where he quotes from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavana Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. So in this creation, these living entities are rotating, Srila Prabhupada says. The cycle of birth and death. They're going up and down. But if some fortunate person, Bhagyavan Jeev, fortunate living entity, Guru Krishna Prasade, by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, we get the seed, Bhaktilata Bij. Bij means seed. Bhaktilata Bij. So we get a seed of devotional service. The creeper of devotional service, Bhaktilata, we get a seed. And that seed has to be nurtured by chanting, hearing and chanting the holy names and being very careful that weeds are not growing. And when we nurture it and chant, then it fructifies and gives the fruit, the love of God. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying that is what is actually desirable. Right? So he says in the last part of the purport that, but if by the grace of Krishna one is fortunate enough to meet a guru, a representative of Krishna, one gets the clue to returning home back to Godhead, having achieved self-realization. That is what is actually desirable. Bhajatatma labdhe, one must take to Krishna consciousness for self-realization. So this is not an option. This is not something that we may or may not do. This is absolutely necessary for us to make progress in spiritual life, to take to Krishna consciousness for self-realization. So the one other point I will conclude with is, so where does that leave the concept of Yukta Vairagya? So sometimes people, even devotees, when they read these verses, they feel that, well, nothing can be accepted, which is even coming on its own course. That's why Rupa Goswami Pad, all these great acharyas, the six Goswamis, were very clear when they gave us instructions about what should be done, what should not be done. So atyahara prayasascha. So collecting more than necessary and over endeavoring was what they spoke about. They didn't speak about performing no endeavor. They spoke about over endeavoring. So what's the difference between endeavoring and over endeavoring? And that's something that it takes some experience and guidance to understand. You may confuse that if you have to become a devotee, we should absolutely do nothing. But that is not what Yukta Vairagya is. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur taught us by his personal example. I mean, he was one of the first sannyasis to ride a motor car. And think about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's time. This was well over 100 years ago, and it was not very common for at least people in India to ride motor cars, and let alone a sadhu to have a motor car. And there's pictures of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada in motor cars. And then Srila Prabhupada, he would say, yeah, if the devotees offer me a golden Rolls Royce, I will accept it because that's their love for me. So accepting anything for the service of Krishna uh, is Yukta Vairagya. But of course, we have to be very, very careful here because our mind is so tricky that sometimes it'll trick us into accepting things that are very superfluous in the name of saying it's Yukta Vairagya. That's where guidance is very important. Uh, and Srila Prabhupada also was very clear on this point in his writings that the need of the hour when ISKCON was established in early days was that all the people who would join would be dedicated 100% living in the temple devotees. But Srila Prabhupada wrote in the purports that and his talks and teachings that over time, uh, uh, vast majority of the members of our institution will not be actually living in temples. They will be living outside the temple and contributing in a major way, practicing Krishna consciousness to the best of their ability, very sincerely, and contributing in a major way to both the preaching activities. So there will be a set of people who will be in the temple, brahmacharis and other residents who will focus on practicing Krishna consciousness as a full-time seva. And there will be others who will support them from the outside by supporting the temple and by attending all sorts of programs in the temple, but may still have professions outside. And the Yukta Vairagya concept is that the idea is whatever we have, we dedicate to the service of Krishna. Now this can become a nuanced point and sometimes some controversial point as well. So I'm just speaking about the principle of it. The principle of it, Srila Prabhupada understood that our movement will, as it grows and scales globally, will not be a movement where if you have to be a Krishna conscious person, then you have to live in the temple. Srila Prabhupada was very clear about that. Uh, so the point is, we can still be very fixed in our Krishna consciousness, and as long as we are required to provide for our families, we have jobs that are Krishna conscious. Of course, if someone has a job as a butcher, it becomes a problem. It just directly contradicts our ability to perform Krishna consciousness. But being able to have sattvic jobs, the mode of goodness, and then be able to still support activities in the temple and others is still Krishna consciousness. So anyway, this is a little bit of a point where sometimes it becomes a little debatable exactly what is Yukta Vairagya, what is not. But I just wanted to tie it all together in the context of the prior verse and this verse that the idea is that we are convinced that Krishna consciousness is the goal of life. We practice our devotional service in that idea and not pursue material uh, opulence as the primary goal of our activities and not pursue the achievement of heavenly planets as the primary goal of our activities, but really pursue achieving love of Krishna as our primary goal of activities. So those are some of the points. You can speak a lot more on these verses, but I'll pause here and see if any comments or questions are there. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Ananda Vilas Prabhu, thank you for
Thank you.
enlightening class and a reminder not to get too entangled in material comforts in this life. My question has to do with what's known as NDEs or near-death experiences, where people say, well, it seems that all people that have these NDEs have the same experience, basically, where, they go through a tunnel and there's light, and then they find themselves in a place where seemingly it's, more beautiful. It's hard to describe the colors. They also somehow meet other people there that have gone before them. Um, and I'm just wondering, is that I guess you could say like an illusion. Um, I guess they would call it heaven. Um, how do we process that particular experience?
Thank you, Rambati. So two things I'll say. One is I've never had one personally, so I don't have a first-hand knowledge of this. And secondly, Srila Prabhupada also in his writings and purports never really uh, specifically gave too much credence to this. That sometimes he says it could be hallucination. One time, now I'm not making joke of your question, but I'll narrate a incident when Srila Prabhupada was asked by one disciple that, Srila Prabhupada, when I chant and intensely I see a red light that is glowing, what should I do? Srila Prabhupada told him, keep chanting, it'll go away. So, so sometimes, uh, we confuse our hallucinations or our desire for something that we want to experience as something that is factual and real. So again, I'm not discrediting the people who make these uh, these points that they have experienced near death, and I'm sure there are people who, and I've even heard from devotees as well, where they felt that when they're on the operating table, they were actually able to come out of their body and see what was happening outside and how people were sitting. I've heard from devotees as well. So yeah, so clearly the point is that your subtle body is different from your gross body. We know that Krishna's already said that. In the seventh chapter of the Gita, he says, Bhumi rapo nalo vayukham, mana buddhi evacha, ahankara iti emme, binna prakritirashtadha. So earth, water, fire, air, ether, these are all gross elements, and our body is made up of that. Solids, liquids, you have blood, marrow, you have solids, bones, and tissue, and then you have fire in your belly, you have air, you have empty space. So your body is made up of these five elements. But there's also subtle things like mana, buddhi, ahankar, mind, intelligence, and ego. So even when you sleep and you dream, you realize that you may experience certain things, like you may experience going to a fantastic place and even eating or drinking certain foods that are very tasty, and you actually experience the taste of these things. If there's something that you liked as a child, and you may dream that you're actually in that place and eating that thing, and you may actually experience the taste, but reality is your body is sleeping in the bed, and it's your subtle body, which is the mind, intelligence, and ahankara, which has actually transported itself back to a place where you're experiencing these things, pains and pleasures. So is that a near-death experience? Because your gross body is sitting somewhere else and your subtle body is experiencing something else. So these are all things that uh, metaphysically they can be explained and they can be discussed. But the bottom line is that even the subtle body is material. It is not spiritual. So we may experience pleasures and pains with our subtle body as well when we are not physically experiencing with our gross body. But even that is material. So for a spiritual experience, we really have to practice Krishna consciousness. And even if a person in near-death experience actually experiences some heavenly planets, the point that Prahlad Maharaj is making is that even that experience is really not spiritual. At the end of the day, it's material. It might be a much better material situation than you're in right now, but that is not a permanent situation. Uh, and so that is really the point. I don't specifically answer your question because I'm not an expert in that field, but I'm just giving you the context of what Srila Prabhupada has said and what Prahlad Maharaj is saying in this particular verse.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else?
Krishna Prabhu, thank you for your class. Quick question. If from the highest planet in the material world to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place, then does it make any sense to invest any amount of time, energy, or resources in trying to improve conditions in our particular circumstance. Sometimes even devotees may sometimes concern themselves with issues of social welfare or environmental issues. Does such an endeavor actually make any sense in the light of the fact that everything here is temporary? We're going to die, and really, regardless of the extent to which we improve conditions, it's still regarded as miserable. So, should an intelligent individual who understands these things expend any amount of time or energy to try to improve conditions?
Thank you, Prabhuji, for that question. And it's a very deep point. See, the practicality is what we have to consider, right? So are we saying that, and again, I'm not asking a rhetorical question, I'm just making the point that if a devotee becomes sick, then are we saying that we should become so heartless that we should say, well, you're sick, so you're going to die anyway, so why not die now? And let's not really give any care or any sort of medical care that can potentially fix that situation. And Srila Prabhupada is very clear, and whatever I'm speaking is basically from Srila Prabhupada's purports. It's not my opinion here. Srila Prabhupada said that this body is important because it's our vehicle for becoming Krishna conscious, right? For performing seva. You cannot clean the temple with your spirit soul. You have to clean it with your hands and legs. And if you have a temple that doesn't have basic facilities where people can even come and take prasadam, and the prasadam is not first class quality, Srila Prabhupada said this, that when guests come, they should be served first class prasadam. Therefore, if our understanding is that, well, tasty prasadam is also kind of a sense enjoyment, so all we need for nourishment is basically nourishment. So we just serve them some basic khichdi that has nutrition but no taste, because the objective is to get nutrition. So you can take it to any extreme in that sense, right? That say, well, live a completely minimalistic life and have nothing that that is needed. And Srila Prabhupada said, well, I can sit under a temple, under a tree and chant, but will you come? So have gorgeous temples where people in general can be attracted and they can see the gorgeous worship of the deities. They can have opulent prasadam. They can have nice facilities to stay. These are all things that devotees do so that people at large can be attracted to Krishna consciousness. And at the same time, when devotees who have given their life to Krishna consciousness are requiring medical care or health care or just general care, it is Vaishnava compassion to be able to provide that. And so these things are required from the perspective of nurturing and serving Vaishnavas. So we are not interested in simply feeding hungry people because they will be hungry again tomorrow. But we are interested in giving them prasadam, so that while their hunger is diminished, they also become spiritually benefited. We are not simply interested in opening senior homes so that old people who have nowhere to go can live, but we are interested in opening facilities where devotees, as they get older, have a place where they can live together and they can practice Krishna consciousness in a very favorable environment. So our Sri Rupa Goswami says, Anukulena Krishna Anushilanam. To be able to perform favorable devotional service, you need a favorable environment. That's just we live in this material body. We are not some Paramahamsas, at least I'm not. So you require some basic facilities to be able to function in a way that you're not completely disturbed in mind. And that's just our conditioning. So in order to, and again, this is where some experience and nuance is required. Then you can go completely overboard saying my minimum requirements are this. But if you practically think about it, then there's certain things of standard of living in terms of just cleanliness and facilities that are required for one to favorably practice Krishna consciousness. Like if the temple hall is 45 degrees because the heat is not working, expecting all devotees to sit and focus and hear Srimad Bhagavatam, you're inconveniencing devotees. So in that case, we make a facility that the temple room is heated so that devotees can not worry about the elements and focus on hearing the holy name and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, is that pursuit of sense gratification? I would argue no, because our ability to provide some basic facility for devotees to have nice accommodations, nice ability to sit and listen to Srimad Bhagavatam and chant holy name, all this is required. This is all required. So that's where a little bit of guidance and maturity is required to understand what is required and what is extraneous sense gratification. So taking the position that, well, we should not make any improvements to anything that we are in terms of our daily living is the extreme position. And that might be okay for a Babaji, might be okay for a person like our Raghunath Das Goswami. Srila Prabhupada also mentioned in the purport that we should be inspired by the life of Raghunath Das Goswami. But we cannot imitate. So we cannot suddenly decide that our daily nourishment will come from the discarded food, the food that's even discarded by the cows. How Raghunath Das Goswami used to take food that was even discarded by the cows. He would take the rotten grains of rice and he would wash it nicely, and then the kernels inside he would eat. Now that is an extreme case of uh, austerity, and that can be performed by great souls like Raghunath Das Goswami. But that is not necessarily how we can live our lives, because we would not survive. So the goal is, what can we do to maximize our opportunity to hear and chant Krishna's holy name and maximize our ability? And because of our material conditioning and our ability to our need for certain basic things that are required, otherwise we will not even be able to sustain a Krishna consciousness. Giving those things or having those things is not considered extraneous. Is not considered mindless pursuit of material benefits. If we, if a devotee who's dedicated their life to Krishna consciousness needs medical attention and we have no ability to give them the medical attention, we just say, "Oh, sorry, Prabhu, you're not the body, you're the soul. So I'm glad you gave so much service for 60 years. Now that you're old or unwell, too bad. I mean, we don't really worry about the body. You can just pass away." Well, that sounds so heartless and sounds so. And again, I'm giving a very jarring example because uh, Krishna consciousness is all about what love for Krishna and love for the devotees. So if our practice of vairagya makes us heartless, then that is the wrong conclusion. That is a wrong understanding of Krishna consciousness, where somehow we become heartless, callous individuals that don't really care about each other and only think we should be completely austere and chant Krishna. Prabhuji, I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm just giving the extreme context because the point that Vaishnava compassion is such a key part of our spiritual life. And who's a Vaishnava? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke about it. You have different categories of Vaishnavas. So even a person who chants Krishna's name once is a Vaishnava. So what about our compassion to those people, right? So when we understand it more holistically, it becomes clear that some basic things have to be there so that people can at least continue their Krishna consciousness. If I overstep, please excuse me, but I just thought I would clarify the point as well in terms of Yukta Vairagya.
That was good. So the guiding principle, if I'm understanding you, is what will or will not serve the interest of devotional service.
100%. 100%.
All right. What then of suppose we are endeavoring for general improvements in the environment that are not necessary for devotional service or don't necessarily contribute to devotional service in any way, or might even disincentivize one for devotional service. So, for example, trying to improve the material environment through activism for let's say reducing air or water pollution. um, it doesn't necessarily help us in our devotional service, but endeavors of that sort, if we actually succeeded in making the material world more comfortable for non-devotees, they would have less incentive to take up devotional service. Is that a mistaken idea, or might that be the case?
Yeah, so if you look at what the Ishopanishad says, right? The Ishopanishad very clearly talks about in the first verse itself, Isha Vasidam Sarvam. Everything belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, including the environment we live in. And so a person who understands that everything belongs to the Lord, if you borrow your neighbor's lawnmower, then you mow your lawn and return it in the exact same condition. Maybe you even fill gas and say, sorry, I utilized the gas and I've refilled it. So thank you for letting me use your lawnmower. That's basic courtesy. It's not a very advanced stage of consciousness. It's just basic courtesy that if you borrow your neighbor's lawnmower, you use it and return it in the same condition, maybe even a better condition. But it was empty tank of gas, you fill it with tank of gas, the gratitude. The environment is no different. We don't own it. We don't own the water. We don't own the rivers. We don't own the environment. So somehow thinking that our business is to exploit the environment as much as possible to ruin it is going against the fundamental point that the Supreme Lord is saying, that everything belongs to Him. So if it doesn't belong to you, you have no business destroying it. Now, the concept of activism and all of that, that's a little more nuanced question. So devotees are not typically interested in becoming, that is not the goal. The goal is not to become an environmental activist. But in some cases, you've seen devotees who are interested in these causes so that because they're connected with Krishna, and then they connect with people who are similarly interested because it shows that they have compassion in their heart. So you have to start, so when you preach out to people, you have to reach out somewhere where there's a spark, right? So if you reach out to a person whose only focus is to destroy the environment or doesn't care about the environment and kill animals mercilessly, then that person's ability to even hear Krishna conscious message is very hard. I know yesterday Prabhu was on the call and he meets so many people in so many walks of life. And if you find somebody who is, let's say, already a vegetarian or thinking about being a vegetarian because they feel unnecessary killing of animals is lacks compassion or cares for the environment, those individuals, in many cases, not always, but in many cases, they're more open to hearing about, well, I'll tell you a reason why, you just feeling compassion for animals and you're feeling compassion for the environment, but I'll tell you a bigger reason why that is actually a scientific fact and why we should feel that way. Because everything is connected with Krishna. And so the ability to introduce Krishna consciousness to those individuals becomes easier because they're already receptive. They already understand that they're not the body. It's to some level, they also understand that the goal of life is not to exploit everything as much as we can and enjoy. So there could be some reasons why devotees reach out to these various groups that are focused on this. But the basic point you're making is right, 100% right. That the devotee's objective is not to become an environmentalist or become a philanthropist or become a builder of multiple charity hospitals. That alone is not the goal. But if that goal is connected with introducing and expanding Krishna consciousness, then it becomes relevant. Of course, there are so many different people with so many different methods, and not every method has to be exactly the same as the other method. But as long as the objective is to sincerely practice Krishna consciousness and and engage others in whether it's slowly or quickly is really the point, right? And I'll end with one metaphor that my dear friend and senior god brother Gauranga Prabhu gave me one time. And I asked him a similar question: that why should we waste our time with people who are seemingly material but then not really immediately taken to Krishna consciousness? And he said, "There's wet grass, there's damp grass, and then there's dry grass. If you take fire to wet grass, you may see nothing is happening. But over time, that slowly that wet grass is becoming damp grass. And if you take fire to damp grass, you may see nothing is happening. But slowly that damp grass is converting to dry grass. And if you take fire to dry grass, it immediately ignites. So similarly, living entities who are seemingly only peripherally understanding Krishna consciousness, when they come and live in an environment where, like when we bring students from the outside, they come and look at our focus on environment and not destroying the environment further, they appreciate our mood, and then they slowly become connected with Krishna. Right? So the whole concept of wet grass, damp grass, dry grass struck with me, and it said, this is like our service is to be able to connect people with Krishna. Yena kena prakarena mana Krishna deveshayat. Narada Muni says that somehow or the other, we have to connect ourselves with Krishna. Some people are connected with prasadam, some people are connected with kirtan, some people are connected with just seeing the beautiful deity of the Lord and how gorgeously the deities are decorated. Some people are connected with the philosophy, right? So expecting everybody to be connected with the philosophy is unreasonable. Not everybody will be convinced with the philosophy because they may not care. Some people may be connected with just prasadam. Some people may just be connected with the compassionate nature of devotees. So that is why it becomes a little more broader than a single idea that preaching can be only done in a certain way. I don't know if specifically answered your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have a few comments. In my experience, Srila Prabhupada, depending upon the circumstances, he had different kinds of responses to questions that devotees would ask about these kinds of things. One thing that he mentioned with regards to preaching to certain classes of people, vegetarians or vegans, for example, versus say a businessman or whatever. Srila Prabhupada actually cautioned us about um, uh, being selective in that way about whom we preach to, with the explanation that we should we should preach to everyone indiscriminately. We should distribute prasad to everyone indiscriminately. We should not consider who maybe is more fit or who is more receptive, um, because actually you can never really tell. The individuals that you think are going to be more receptive sometimes actually are not at all, and sometimes the people you least expect to be receptive become wonderful devotees. And then on the other hand, he would sometimes advise that it is more efficient to focus on those who show some promise and don't waste time with someone who is not showing interest. Then, with regards to issues like environmentalism, devotees would often ask questions like this. Srila Prabhupada, sometimes he would decry um, uh, what he referred to as Ugra karma. He would criticize oil drilling, for example. Other times, he would say, "Why do you care? What do you care? Why do you care about the environment? Why do you care about what's going to happen to the planet? You're going to die. You're going to die. So you should be concerned with affecting a solution to the real problems of life, and not waste your time with these other considerations. Nature will take care of itself. You can't really change what's going to happen. Maybe you can make a small dent in the collective karma of the planet by propagating Krishna consciousness, but you're only going to be here for a short time, so what, why should you concern yourself with the environment when you're going to die? So, he would take both positions under different circumstances, depending upon who he was speaking to and the specific nature of the issue. But he would argue from both sides. Anyway, I just thought I would contribute that. Thank you very much for your class, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. We will end here. Hare Krishna.